Hello, everyone. My name's Bob Ski Masson, and we're here for another episode of the Longmont Senior Center Tech Connect. Today, we're going to talk about working with files on your Apple Macintosh. So, as we all know, Macs are easy to use, and generally, there's not a lot of problems using them. But occasionally, our files can get lost or we're hard to find. So I just want to point out that today we're not talking about Apple iPhone or iPad, and we certainly aren't going to be talking about Windows. So here's the agenda. First off, part one, what's a file? I call this section some fairly useless but mildly interesting information. We're going to talk about disk drives and file systems and so on. And then the second part is probably what we're here for, is saving files. When you save files, where do you save them? And more importantly, how do you find them when you need to get back to them? And then in part three, we'll cover some best practices, kind of ways to keep organized and reduce clutter, some file naming suggestions, that kind of thing. All right, so what exactly is a file? Well, technically, it's a string of bits that sit on your hard drive. But every file, that's photos, documents, music, whatever it is a string of bits. For example, this string of bits represents my puppy dog, Canis Fuzzbudicus. It's up to the operating system and the file system of your device, in this case, Apple Mac and Mac OS, to keep track of where things are and what they are, what kind of files they are. So first of all, files are stored physically on a hard drive, or sometimes we call it a disk drive. And it's internal to your machine, whether it's a desk side, a desktop, or a laptop. Inside there is some kind of hard drive. On the left here, we have the traditional hard disk drive, or HDD. This is a spinning mechanical drive, and it's been around for a long time. This little platter here, actually there's a stack of platters, spin at 5,400, 7,200, or 10,000, even 10,000 RPMs. And then there's this little actuator that goes back and forth. And what happens is that little actuator has a sensor on it, and it can detect whether a spot on the disk is a 1 or a 0, whether it's magnetized or not. The advantage of the HDD is its very large capacity. Because the manufacturing, they've had such a long history of manufacturing these things, they've made them more and more dense. You can get HDDs today that are like 25 terabytes, 25,000 gigabytes of storage. They're also relatively inexpensive because of this long history of manufacturing. The vendors have figured out how to make these things and make them very inexpensively. The downside of this is because it is mechanical, it can be fragile. And by the way, most external drives that you buy, let's say you have a little orange Western Digital drive for your backup, those are spinning head drives, or 5,400 RPM spinning head drives. So you have to kind of be careful with them, because what happens is this thing spins around, this actuator goes back and forth over the platter, but if you drop it or jar it suddenly, the heads will bounce off the platter and scratch the platter, and it will make that portion of the disk unreadable. So you have to treat your external drive fairly carefully. On the SSD side, the solid state drive side, these are relatively new, the last 20 years, say. They're made up of chips on a circuit board with an interface that makes it look just like a disk drive. The good news on SSD is it's hard to break. Because there's no moving parts here, you can drop it, jar it, doesn't even matter. It's also very fast because you don't have to wait for the platter to spin around and then wait for the actuator to come over the cylinder that you want to read. It's much faster than an HDD. The downside is that it's more expensive, although those prices are coming down. And in fact, almost any device you buy today has got an SSD. Your phone has several SSDs, one for memory, one for storage, your iPad, and your laptop's undoubtedly SSD if it was made in the last 10 years. So speaking of bits and bytes and so on, first of all, a bit is a 0 or a 1. This is the base language of computers, is whether a bit is on or off. It takes 8 bits to make a byte, and now we always talk about kilobytes and megabytes. That's thousands and millions of 8-bit bytes. And so this table here talks about kilobytes and megabytes. Each entry in this table is 1,000 times the previous entry. So a gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes, a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes, which is a lot, but there are data centers that think in terms of petabytes and even exabytes, which is, I don't know, billions and trillions. We're mostly concerned with, as consumers, we're mostly concerned with megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes. So let's put this in perspective. This is the average size of some common file types. Some of these I determined by actually averaging the size of many of these files on my computer. Some of them I looked it up. An average email, which is just plain text, which actually there is fairly rare today, is 0.003 megabytes. That's 3,000 bytes or 3 kilobytes. An email that's made out of HTML, which is generally how email is sent today, is larger because it has more characters. And while you don't usually see those characters because they're used for formatting, they're still in the email nevertheless. And an average HTML email is about 20 kilobytes. And you can see a Word document. I have a 2-page handout for this lesson that is 26 kilobytes. A spreadsheet, similarly, this spreadsheet I think was the summer 2023 schedule. It contains a calendar, but no images. It's only 26 kilobytes. A PDF report is slightly larger than that. PDF is a portable document format. This actually happens to be the first 10 pages of my tax return. So I ripped those 10 pages out and measured it. It's 121 kilobytes. On the iPhone, now pictures vary depending on what's in the picture because of the way the compression algorithm works. But a couple of pictures I took on my phone using Apple's high efficiency image coding, HEIC, were 3.1 megabytes. And without that, it's a plain JPEG. That same photo is 4.2 megabytes. So there's a little efficiency gain there from the compression algorithms. If you look at some audio, this is CD quality, which is not the best music quality, but it's good music quality. 1 minute of that is 10 megabytes. And then there's video. And this is using Apple's high efficiency video coding. 1 minute of video is 68 megabytes. So the takeaway here is we all get the messages that says, hey, send us some money and because you need some more space. And so you start credding out. Well, 1 minute of video is equivalent to about 3,500 emails. So your time is better spent looking at videos and images than looking through thousands and thousands of emails. Emails are almost insignificant in size. Although I have seen people with 100,000 emails, but on those you just wholesale delete the whole thing and start over again. So I thought it'd be interesting. The thing that your device runs, whether it's a PC or a phone or a Mac, is an operating system. And the operating system keeps track of everything. It keeps track of who's using the computer and what's on it and all that sort of thing. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at the market share by operating system type since December of 1999. So this little video will go through that. You can see here in almost 2000, Windows 95 has 66% of the market. Windows 98, Windows 2000, Windows 3.1, Windows NT. The top 5 are all Windows. The reason for that is because there were no handheld devices. Although the iPhone hadn't been invented yet, so these are all PCs or desktop PCs or desk side. So as we zip forward in time, we can see Windows is always at the top. So Windows XP, this is how Bill Gates got rich right here. And you can see in 2007, Windows XP has 80% of the market share. Okay, we still don't have any phones, but what happens in the summer of 2007? I'll give you a hint here. There's a little product that comes out down at the bottom there called Apple iOS. That's the iPhone. And over the next 4 years, you can see June 2011, Apple iOS, which is the operating system for your iPhone, starts to take some market share. We still have Windows 7, Windows XP. Mac OS is high on the list now because Apple's starting to sell a lot more Macs. And good old Windows Vista is still in there. Anyway, let's move forward here. Windows 7, and then, did you see Android? Did you see it pop up the list? Look at that. The reason for this is because this is worldwide. iPhones are generally more popular in the United States, but worldwide, Android phones by many different manufacturers, because Android's an open source operating system. It's not proprietary, although right now Android, the brand name, is owned by Google. So that's pervasive throughout the world. And you can see Windows 10 is here, and this is 2018. Apple iOS is really gaining market share now. And macOS is still about the same place it was. So let's go forward to today. Windows 10 starting to go down. Apple iOS is still at, 17%. And Windows 11's coming on the scene. So you can see how the Android just went wham because it runs on so many devices. Anyway, interesting information that's maybe marginally useful. All right, let's look at your Mac in particular. The Mac has at its base, at the bottom of the screen, a thing we call the dock. And it's a place that you can put apps and items that you may use frequently, and you want to get to them quickly. Open apps, like right here, you have Preview and the Calculator have a little dot below them. And you can rearrange the dock by dragging the apps around. And you can also pull apps off of the dock if you don't use them. For example, this is TurboTax right here. I'll probably pull that off here because I won't ever use TurboTax 2022 again. Okay, that was the end of part 1, which was interesting but perhaps not useful information. But part 2 is going to be much more informative. So stay tuned, check out part 2.